Oh, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Director General IDSA, Mr. Prasad, for his very kind invitation to come out here and share some personal views on this very important topic of the evolving ISIS threat to Southeast Asia. I was very taken when Mr. Chairman was saying that perhaps in India you don't really spend a lot of your attention on Southeast Asia, but I hope that at the end of my presentation you will have some opportunity to think about the importance of containing the ISIS threat in our region, in Southeast Asia, where I come from, RSIS. So in the time available, I'd just like to achieve these aims. I want to try to help you to understand the ISIS phenomenon in wider perspective as part of the evolving global Al-Qaeda movement. This is how I see it as an analyst. You may not agree with me, but we can discuss that. But this is how I would see it. I will also, of course, sketch the evolving ISIS threat in Southeast Asia and briefly discuss something which is of great concern to us in our region, this so-called, which has actually been brought out in the past couple of days, this whole issue of the lone wolves. In Singapore, we have this term DIY, extremists, do-it-yourself extremists. So, but we're talking about the same thing, lone wolves, and of course we'll look at implications. So, of course, the threat of ISIS has evolved. We see it being manifested in different ways in different parts of the world. This date, 29 June 2014, is very important to all of us, certainly in Southeast Asia, because when Baghdadi declared the caliphate, 29 June 2014, it was a huge symbolic thing. I think the genius of the ISIS strategies are they understand the psychological and symbolic impact of this declaration on Muslim communities worldwide. Essentially, ISIS, I think we will agree, is a terrorist group that's trying to consolidate itself as a state. But I think it's important to reiterate that it did not pop out of thin air. In fact, it is very much part of the Al-Qaeda global movement. It is I would call it an Al-Qaeda mutation. So you see, I would say that the current configuration of the globalized Al-Qaeda movement comprises four distinct but not mutually exclusive dimensions. I'm adapting this from Professor Bruce Hoffman of Georgetown University. So I would say that ISIS is part of this. The ISIS ideology is very much similar to the Al-Qaeda ideology, but with more apocalyptic elements. So essentially, Hoffman says that if you look at the global Al-Qaeda movement, you have at the core Al-Qaeda Central, which is now led by Ayman al-Zawahiri. You move one circle out, you have the Al-Qaeda affiliates, which are all the sub-regional hubs. Like we heard today about AQAP as well as AQIM. Of course, there's also Shabab, Al-Qaeda in South Asia or Indian subcontinent, Nusra, which has changed name, and ISIS, which has morphed into a global rival to Al-Qaeda. Move out the analytical circle even further, you have Al-Qaeda Network, which is basically those guys who have spent time training in the Al-Qaeda training camps, and today the ISIS training camps, and these will be one day the returning foreign fighters. Last time we were worried about the returning Al-Qaeda foreign fighters, and in Southeast Asia, the earlier generation of returning foreign fighters that had fought in Afghanistan later formed Jamaah Islamiyah in Southeast Asia, which of course perpetrated the Bali bombings of October 2002, and then splintered into other groups as well in Indonesia. Today, of course, when we're talking about returning foreign fighters, we could talk about the ISIS foreign fighters, which are of great concern to us, Southeast Asia as well. The biggest and widest circle, of course, Hoffman would call Al-Qaeda Galaxy, which are essentially the lone wolves. These are the people who have not actually gone to a training camp, but because of relatively easy access through your mobile phone, cheap smartphone and cheap internet technology, you can go online right now and listen to a lecture by Aulaki or one of those ideologues, and this is how easy it is. So essentially, you can get radicalized. We know some people spend hours online, and they can get radicalized just immersing themselves online. So what about Southeast Asia? Well, ISIS has definitely penetrated into our region because we are, well, in our Southeast Asia, we have about quarter of the world's Muslims are in Southeast Asia after all. A quarter of the global Muslim community is in Southeast Asia. ISIS, of course, will know that. And in fact, regional groups in Southeast Asia, all those acronyms, Jamaah Ansarut Tauhid Indonesia, the East Indonesian Mujahideen MIT, Jamaah Ansarut Daulah Indonesia. Abu Sayyaf has been mentioned in this conference. They have all pledged allegiance to the ISIS leader, and the significance of that is this means that they also imbibe the global jihad perspective. For example, the late leader of MIT in Indonesia, Eastern Indonesia, Santoso, who was killed by the Indonesian security forces in July last year, he actually welcomed Uyghurs from Xinjiang. Our colleague was talking about Xinjiang. And in fact, he was saying that he's willing to train with them. He was willing to train them. And in fact, Indonesian security forces actually captured a few Uyghurs in Indonesia, about to conduct operations together with MIT. So this is the concern for us in Southeast Asia. And of even greater concern is the fact that ISIS has even created a Southeast Asian military unit called Katiba Nusantara. And these are essentially, as you can see from the picture, children of Southeast Asian fighters that are now in Syria fighting with ISIS. And they are being trained in firearms, but essentially they're trying to incubate a new culture for the next generation of fighters. And this is a long-term project. In fact, the academy they are in is called the Azam Academy, Abdullah Azam Academy. And of course, Abdullah Azam, the Palestinian Jordanian ideologue, he was a mentor of Osama bin Laden. That's why I say ISIS is a continuation of Al-Qaeda, if you like. So we are very aware of this. ISIS is clearly spending intellectual and analytical resources on Southeast Asia. It's definitely transformed the operational threat picture. We know that there's a lot of interest in Southeast Asia, in building support in Southeast Asia because of the great increase in Malay and Indonesian language websites and publications. The gentleman on the top is a leading Indonesian extremist ideologue. He's behind bars, Ahmad Abdul Rahman, and he has pledged support for ISIS. And in fact, he has coordinated with ISIS in last year's Jakarta attacks. In January, if you remember, there were attacks in Jakarta. That's a gentleman, Sun Hakim, who was part of the cell led by Ahmad Abdul Rahman, the gentleman on top. So future attacks in Southeast Asia could take the form of, at least my assessment, I don't think many people in Southeast Asia would disagree that much, plots by local organized networks on behalf of ISIS. Example, the Jakarta attacks. And in fact, even in Singapore, in August last year, I don't know whether you follow these things, there was a plot by an ISIS cell based in Batam, south part of Indonesian island, south of Singapore, to fire a rocket at the Marina Bay Sands facility, which is, if you watch F1 race, you know, the Singapore race, the night race, is that funny looking building with a ship-like thing on top. So you can see it from Batam Island. It's a very iconic structure. That was fought by Indonesian police. There's a big debate in Singapore whether they could actually have done it, fired a rocket. So the thing is, they were planning it, and they had instructions from Syria-based Indonesian militant fighting with ISIS to do so. So these local groups, it's a matter of concern. Returning foreign fighters, once it has been pointed out at this conference, Mosul is falls, Raqqa in Syria falls. A number of the Southeast Asian fighters will come back, and they will have the expertise and the networks and the extremist ideology. They'll come back and they will likely want to do something. And of course, self-radicalized lone wolves, which is of concern to us. So what's the evolving threat picture? Just to give a snapshot. Malaysia, it affects all of us in Southeast Asia. Malaysia have been arresting a number of people. In fact, since 2013, I believe it's over 200 now. The Indonesians they have prevented a number of plots. Last year, they had several successes, especially against MIT, which is very pro-ISIS. At the end of 2016, actually, a number of Indonesian prisoners that had been jailed for terror-related offenses were released. The concern is not all of them may have been rehabilitated. So there's a concern that they may go back to their old ways and join their old extremist networks. And by some estimates, at least 100 Indonesians have come back from Syria, as well as a number of others deported from Turkey. And of course, there's also this simmering concern in the background about the Rohingya situation in Myanmar. There are a number of refugee camps, Malaysia and Thailand, and it's not lost on analysts in our region that this is could be a breeding ground for radicalization. So, lone wolves, DIY extremists, as I said, this is a concern now. It's not even new. I mean, even when Anwar al-Awlaki was also mentioned this morning, was alive, he had actually radicalized national servicemen in Singapore, as well as a few others. In fact, at his peak, Anwar al-Awlaki, his picture is there, was known as the Bin Laden of the internet. And so, I would say that ISIS has carried this on. It's a force multiplier. The use of social media is a force multiplier, and lone wolf phenomenon is something which has been facilitated by ISIS use of the social media, and they are very good at it. I mean, they're very good at it. The messages are relatively simple, easy to understand, and some communications people will say they're very sticky. They stick in your mind. They certainly exploit the gaming culture of young people. You can see from the picture. This is our Call of Duty, there's a famous game called Call of Duty. Yodo, all these terms, you only die once. This sort of thing is being exploited. Yeah, the Al-Qaeda messages tend to fall behind in terms of appeal to the youth, and it has been said that ISIS is a youth organization. They target the youth, and they also target families, young women, professionals, military personnel, because they're not just building an army, they're trying to build a state. So they are trying to expand the cast a wide net to radicalize as many people as possible. Families, we know in Southeast Asia of families trying to go to Syria and Iraq. And Western Coalition has some way to go to sort of catch up with social media. It has been said that ISIS represents jihadi cool, as you can see from some of the pictures. It's a youth phenomenon. They are trying to exploit youth. They appeal to young, bored, stimulus-seeking young men and women, trying to get out of what they think are lives that are boring and lack meaning. Many of them, certainly we see this in Southeast Asia, they go for humanitarian reasons because they want to see the suffering in Syria, and they want to join a charity, but they essentially get trapped over there, and then they get radicalized, and if they return, they could pose a threat to society. And I must say, me and my colleagues, we've analyzed some of the propaganda, and they're very good with the themes. Like this one, for example. Sometimes the people with the worst past create the best future. So this appeal is like redemption. It's like redemption. You think you had a bad life up to now, and you want to turn over a new leaf. So they're very effective in this, which gives rise to one of my key points. I do think that the lone wolf phenomenon will be an increasing concern in our part of the world. It was mentioned, this particular article, How to Make a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom, in the AQAP magazine Inspire. This was translated into Bahasa Indonesia as well. This was translated. So this sort of knowledge is floating around in social media. Some analysts not in Southeast Asia, but in general, they are saying the lone wolf may downstream potentially deploy even CBRN weapons. But I would say at this point in time, I agree with a colleague from China talking about the Xinjiang situation. Everyday things like knives, and as you can see from the Nice attack, the truck, these could easily be mobilized. And this is why I fully agree with the Sufan group, that phrase at the bottom, the weaponization of everyday life is from the Sufan group. That's a good way of putting it. So this makes it very difficult, increases the challenge for law enforcement. And recently, a few days ago, Baghdadi was saying, the fall, okay, so if we give up on Mosul, but supporters can carry out attacks everywhere. And this is not the first time they've said it. September 2014, when the Obama administration launched airstrikes against ISIS positions in Syria and Iraq, the then spokesperson Adnani also said roughly the same thing. Supporters, you can strike back wherever you are, which is not a new thing. Even Awlaki used to say that your enemy is on your right and on your left. You can carry out your operations wherever you are. You don't have to come all the way here. This is quite a strategic appeal. And of course, one manifestation of the lone wolf threat would be the insider threat, because we know, certainly in Southeast Asia, that ISIS has radicalized personnel and security forces and other sensitive appointments. Social cohesion and resilience, for example, for many years in Singapore, we've had this total defense program Just last year, we had the SD Secure movement in Singapore. I'll be happy to talk about it in Q&A if you're interested. There's a need to promote good governance so that all communities feel a stake in society and would not just dismiss all these government initiatives as just propaganda, right? So Robert Thompson, this morning, Frank Ledwidge mentioned General Templar from the Emergency. Also, Robert Thompson was active in Emergency as well, and this is one of his famous phrases: "You cannot make bricks without straw," right? So in other words, all your policies must be perceived as authentic and having real-world effects. Otherwise, they'll just be dismissed as propaganda. Secondly, I think it's important for young people to be helped to build mental and theological firewalls against ISIS narratives, extremist narratives, critical thinking skills, something which we really see as important. And in fact, there have been some programs in the region that have been launched to help to ingrain in young people. Don't just read everything online and just believe it. Be critical. See or just evaluate and compare with other sources. Young people should be exposed to counterparts from other faiths at a young age, and especially important in multicultural societies. And this will help create firewalls against sectarian appeals of ISIS. And one of the big challenges is that ISIS has very interesting appeals, right? It is come to Syria, Iraq, and build this new society. It has been said that young people should be more moderate, but some scholars have said that it's difficult for young people to be moderate. Young people are energetic. They want something to excite them. So an alternative focus that is more exciting than the ISIS theme has to be provided. And my last slide. Religious leaders, of course, have a role to play. They're very important because they need to provide the theological baseline, because we do know in Southeast Asia, ISIS exploits the relative lack of religious knowledge of young people to mislead them. But one of the things I think needs to be done is religious scholars must try to master social media and produce messages that are easy to digest for young people in a soundbite age. That's, of course, a big challenge, because religious scholars can counsel on the use of certain terminology and ideas. Social media training for religious leaders may be necessary, and ultimately, even in Singapore, we've been trying to, I know the government has been trying to reach out to the likes of Google, Twitter, Facebook, to see whether there's some scope for cooperation. And in Southeast Asia, ultimately, there's a mixture of religious scholars and former ISIS militants that have been asked to work together to try to counter the ISIS narrative. There's variation between certain countries. We can talk about that if you're interested. So that's it. Thank you very much.